December 7, 1941, Japan unleashed a series of devastation onto the United States. Following this attack, President Roosevelt utilized the emotions of the citizens to full effect. He had used emotions of grief and shock that had been emitting in the citizens to draw the United States into the war. On February 19, 1942, Roosevelt had signed the Executive Order 9066, which declared that all Japanese Americans were to be deported to internment camps. The inevitable consequences were the social, economic, and political issues inflicted upon the Japanese Americans. When the Japanese American internment camps came into effect, the Americans' perspective of the Japanese had changed completely. They, the Japanese, were seen as enemies, regarding of their citizenship as an American. This is showcased in the book Snow Falling on Cedar, which quotes, "In the name of humanity, do your duty as jurors. Find Kabuo Miyamoto innocent as charged, and let him go home with his family. Return this man to his wife and children." Nell Goodmunson attempts to convince the jurors to make the right choice rather than a biased and racist opinion. However, almost all the jurors were still biased against Kabuo. In the courtroom, it was also mentioned that Kabuo was of Japanese descent. The book quotes, "Presuming that because the accused man is of Japanese descent, you will see an enemy there." Hold on, doesn't this display the bias against the Japanese because a trial to determine guilty or innocent almost turned into a case of injustice? Yeah, I think so.
When they would say, well, you're being interned for your own protection. Well, as a 10, 11-year-old kid, I knew that if I were in here for my own protection, why are the machine guns pointing in at us and not out?
Long-term political effects that had affected the Japanese was the fact that Japan, still to this day, takes full responsibility for the damages that their government had caused during World War II. As I felt ashamed and betrayed by their government, to make things even worse, Japan had been placed under a constitution that had been created exclusively for them that forbid any type of military sources in their country.
Japs evacuate vital West Coast areas for the national security. At Los Angeles, 36,000 Japs see the handwriting on the wall and sell out their goods before their voluntary departure.
The immediate economic impacts of the Japanese American internment camps were detrimental. Japanese people who owned property were forced to leave and abandon their properties immediately. Some planned to negotiate by selling their properties and buying it back after they returned, but to no surprise, only the most fortunate would be able to succeed. This is relatable to the book Snow Falling on Cedars, where Kabuo attempts to purchase his lost land back. Leslie apologizes and states, the Japanese man had asked about the land then, and asserted his wish to buy the 7 acres his family had once owned. Unfortunately, Kabuo did not return in time to purchase his land, and the negotiation had been unsuccessful at the time. Finding out that he hadn't made it in time, he was struck with disappointment. The unreadable Japanese expression on his face when he heard the land that he coveted had been sold. Kabuo had known that if it weren't for the internment camps, he wouldn't have come across this conflict. In the long run, the Japanese had lost almost all their land and their properties, many of which could not be regained as the records were destroyed. This made it very difficult to rebuild back to where they originally once were. The Japanese internment camps not only affected the Japanese economically, but the United States as well. The Japanese in the US had been regular labor workers, but, however, since the deployment of the internment camps, the Japanese had been stripped of their jobs, which stripped the US's economy workers. Following the attack of Pearl Harbor, the United States became blindfolded in hatred. The Japanese had been hated throughout the country and demoralized despite their citizenship to the United States. Psychological injury had a big impact on the Japanese, including depression, feelings of helplessness, and personal insecurity. Following up on these emotions, they also had been attacked with prejudice and racism. Falling on Cedars quotes, "Suckers all look alike, never could tell them guys apart." Not only had they been attacked by Americans, but the racism and prejudiceness against the Japanese had also extended to the point that it had appeared in the courtroom. The book also states, in the back of Judge Lou Fielding's courtroom sat 24 islanders of Japanese ancestry, dressed in clothes they reserved for formal occasion. No law compelled them to take only these rear seats. They had done so instead because San Pedro required it of them without calling it a law. However, although they had been put into constraint, they had still been apologetic for the damages done in the war. The immediate effects of the internment camps were not only short-termed, but long-termed as well. The hate thrown at the Japanese from the Americans had made them feel as they were to blame for all of it. To make matters worse for the Japanese, not only were they not accepted by the vast majority of Americans, but they had also felt betrayed by the government.